Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, and thanks to our General Assembly members and the chairs of our parties. So thank you for having me. This is a very important issue, and I've been traveling this side of the state today. I was in Cape Girardeau this morning, looking out on the same Mississippi River. I was in St. Louis at lunch, looking out at the same Mississippi River, and right now looking out at that river. And this issue of whether the states like Missouri, our citizens, are going to bail out Illinois and other states, it brings up a fundamental question that is at the heart of the Constitution and the rule of law. When America was formed, we said, different than many, many places, we're going to have states. We've ended up with 50 of them. And each state's going to have different rules. They govern themselves. Some will have higher tax rates, lower tax rates. Some will have school systems funded this way or that way. And some will have pension plans that they fund at different levels. And although we don't sit, neither as representatives or as citizens or as Attorney General, judging how and what Illinois has done with their budget, we do know that we've been frugal in Missouri. We've been fiscally conservative, at least when it comes to balancing our budget, having the Hancock Amendment. And so as an Attorney General candidate and as Attorney General, my commitment to the people will be that I will fight every day to make sure the Constitution, the U.S. Constitution, the Missouri Constitution, both of them are upheld, that they're respected, that they're not ignored, and I'll protect the rule of law. And in this case, I believe that the governor of Illinois, Governor Quinn, has signaled that he wants a bailout for his state's pensions, and we should object. And as Attorney General, I will object in a couple different ways that I've considered. One of them has to do with partnering with the legislature, the General Assembly. But the first one is to say, if we have to, we will go to the court system and we will litigate a case that puts to question the balance of power based on our Constitution. That the states like ours, which we're happy to contribute to the ensuring for the common defense and other aspects of American life, the government's life, what they do. But there's a line that has to be drawn. And I think it has to be drawn now at this moment in American history, precisely because if we bail out Illinois now, California's next, and then New Jersey, and then Massachusetts, and then make a list of states, and it's a death spiral that leads us to a place where no one is held accountable for their own decisions, no one is held accountable for their own actions. Really nothing means anything. And if we know anything about America, our Constitution, our rule of law have framed for these hundreds of years how we live together. So, as I mentioned, number one, I will step forward and fight in the courts, if applicable, and make sure that we can stand up and fight back. Number two, other states that are considering this problem have asked the General Assembly to pass a resolution that directs their federal elected officials to oppose bailouts of this kind. Now that may have the authority of something of an exhortation and not a binding law, but that matters when the people, when the leaders of our communities who are often closer to the ground, they're living in their hometowns, and they say, wait, we don't want this. I think that matters, and as Attorney General, I will assist these men and the women in the General Assembly in drafting that kind of resolution to try to get convince our federal delegation. And lastly, we have for far too long in this country had a class of career politicians like my current opponent for this office who refuse to speak out publicly on the big issues of the day. They're interested in, someone mentioned, in 30-second ads and campaigns for the next office. And our state and our nation is at a crossroads. As John Ashcroft said to me once, an intersection. And intersections are dangerous places. You have to decide which way to go. If you choose wrong, you're down the wrong path, but you also might get in an accident. They're dangerous places. We're at an intersection in this state's history and in America's history, and leaders need to lead. And so come January, I intend as Attorney General to be a part of the broader conversation among we the people of America, but especially Missouri, about what the Constitution says and means, what the rule of law and its integrity, why it's so important, and the shared values that got us to this point. I think so much is at stake in this election. We were mentioning before, we're all very optimistic about the general direction at the presidential level and the state level. But these fundamental questions need to be addressed. They need to be addressed in the context of those values in the Constitution. So I'm grateful you came. I'm grateful that we could have this conversation about the issue. And most of all, I'm grateful for the great nation we have, this republic of states, and the state of Missouri, because we can make these points and we can make our future brighter. So I'd be happy to take questions from any of you or any of the press, either one. Questions? Yes, sir.
Has Illinois or California or any of those states, they haven't actually made a formal request yet?
No.
They're just anticipating this?
Well, Governor Quinn included in his budget, he said that his almost $200 billion of state pension liability he described in his budget would be, I guess he proposed it would be covered by what, quote, federal guarantee of the pension. So that was his intention. He's now saying he didn't mean it, it was a printing error. As I once heard someone say, if you want to get someone's attention, grab them by the budget. But you know, budgets reveal a lot about what priorities are, and this was his way of saying how he's going to fill the gap. I will make a point that was made to me by Governor Rick Perry on this topic. You might have seen that the Thompson prison was just purchased by the federal government. In my mind, that's a backdoor bailout. That was a failed project that ran out of money because of poor planning, because they didn't understand what their commitments were, they couldn't find the money. And somehow, magically, the federal government decides they now need to have a $150 million prison, and they pay top dollar for it, so there's a lot of moving parts to this. But when it comes to this question of a federal guarantee of the pensions, what's been signaled by Illinois was their intention, and that's one of the reasons why this came up at this time. Other questions? Oh, sorry. Yes, ma'am. Madam Chairwoman, sorry.
Thank you. I just want to say I love a tough candidate. I'm glad you're standing tough on issues. That's
Good.
what we want.
Well, thank you. You're nice to say out here. I appreciate it. I think that there may have been a good time for people to just be interested in the job and moving along, but this isn't that time because there's so much at stake. The conversations are going to be difficult. We're going to be saying to our neighbors, we all love Illinois, except we play them in football, but you know, we love our neighbors. There's nothing uncharitable about saying that the system that we live together, in fact, it's charitable. The system that we live under, the Constitution and rule of law, holds people accountable for what they do, and their states do. And in Missouri, in all candor, we have our own worries. Our pension is not fully funded. It's not a simple task to continue this process, but this is what we have to do, and we certainly can't be putting our money into other bailouts when we have our own, future to build and to fund and take care of. Other questions?
I'll ask another one. Is Illinois, I went over to Illinois, we heard a talk on it, I think Brian Nichols there was there, but is Illinois' alternative some kind of bankruptcy? Because they can't really, it's so big they can't tax their way out of it.
Right.
Because they raise taxes, taxpayers will leave. So what is their alternative?
Yeah, look,
I mean, it's not well, it's sort of our problem, I guess, because we're all Americans.
Well, it's a national problem because when Illinois' economy stalls and Chicago's because of their problems, it affects all of us. But the question is whether we continue to bail ourselves out in this death spiral or not. And by the way, whether it's constitutional and appropriate to do. But that's a policy question on how they get out of it. But to me, as I was in Cape Girardeau, someone gave the example if the chairwoman has a home next to mine, and I watch her put in a hot tub and big screen TVs and buy 3 cars, and then she goes bankrupt. The expectation is not that we all bail her out, it's that there is a rule of law and a system for dealing with that. One of the parts of what's happened in Illinois is that they have dramatically expanded their pension payments and their coverage, and they have no real contribution of any size over the history of it by the workers. That's a different model, and it's one that's not sustainable. So the short answer is I don't think we know how a bankruptcy looks, but I think we need to find out. Illinois is going to have to restructure how they pay off their debts and how they spend, just like any other business would. Otherwise, again, we'll keep doing this until we end up having the whole country in the same spot, which in all candor we're close to anyway. But anyway, I think there's a big policy question about how we resolve these. But there's a narrow legal question to me about why and whether Missourians should have to pay in to other states' pensions. This is not like we're paying for an aircraft carrier or even paying into a system that is broadly for all Americans. This is a state pension for another state, and it seems to me to be pretty clearly unacceptable. Other questions?
I'd appreciate you mentioning a little bit about Obamacare and your approach to what you foresee coming out here.
Yeah, sure. I have said, and you may have seen the earlier television ad, that when I'm in office, the first minute in office, and I do mean minute, I'll have a new strategy for taking on Obamacare. And people say, well, wait, it was just upheld, and that's true. As to the individual mandate, it was upheld, and the decision disappointed me. I didn't like the rationale, and I didn't like the outcome, but as a conservative, as someone who abides by the law and understands it, the decision's been made. I hope someday they revisit the notion that the taxing authority, the taxing clause in the Constitution can require us to purchase something. It strikes me as a bit worrisome, more than that actually, but that's the law. But that's only one piece of Obamacare. Obamacare is almost 3,000 other pages of the law. And as it's implemented, it's designed to be implemented over 5 or 6 years. So for example, on April 1st of 2013, August 1st, on August 1st of 2013, we will see the mandate against religious institutions go into effect. It actually hasn't gone into effect. And from the standpoint of an attorney, you can't really take the action until the damage is being done or close to it. And so that will be, I think, a case that we ought to at least be at the table. No matter what you think of the underlying argument, the question of the federal government telling us what to do through Obamacare, our religious institutions, profoundly different than what's happened in our country for these many years. The other parts of Obamacare's implementation, there'll be a major tax that will kick on durable medical equipment that will have an impact on Missourians. It may not be a constitutional fight, but it may be a fight as to how we manage our state budget related to Medicaid and some of the other programs, mental health departments. There's a lot of implications to Obamacare that are coming. I think one of the major ones will also be when we start to see the decision making occurring with this panel, the IPAB panel, about who gets care. Now, that's not that different than some of the other decisions that have happened in the past, but it's so heightened, the impact. I think we're going to see people asking questions about the legality of it that's going to impact us. And the last thing I'd say is Obamacare is designed. It is designed. It's been admitted. It's designed to empower larger hospitals the way the payment structure is, because they want to centralize control over the care. This is happening rapidly already. BJC and others, they know how to use the system, and smaller, rural, mostly rural clinics and hospitals are under huge strain. This is actually a problem for access to care, and there are a number of laws that exist before Obamacare that direct how we have to make sure that we have access to care. So I think there's a lot of implications, and my commitment to people when they ask is not that I have X plan today, it's that I will take seriously the Constitution and the rule of law because I see it being intruded upon. And you know, just to segue to a different topic, a different legal case, but same problem. Dodd-Frank, which is a law that was passed that threatens to destroy the economy, and actually, again, primarily destroy small banks. It's going to put the burden of compliance and the burden of interacting with this unaccountable bureaucratic entity called the Consumer Protection Agency or some super consumer protection. That's all happening. The big banks, 5 of them, know they can comply. Most small banks, small town banks, they're having a terrible time, and they're doing one of two things. They're either staying small and just trying to survive, or they're selling out to the big banks. This will, again, cause a whole bunch of changes to how we're living, and Dodd-Frank is, to me, utterly unconstitutional. It was created by Congress, but funded by the Fed, and so it's no longer accountable for its funding from the Congress. It's accountable to the Fed. I mean, you get the point here. We have yet another bureaucratic entity that's removed, and they're going to tell Missourians and others. So that's another course. There was a challenge, a legal challenge, about 4 or 5 weeks ago by attorneys general of other states, and Missouri was left out. I intend to be a part of that too, to make sure.
Good, thank you.
Yep. Other questions? Yes, ma'am. Madam Chairwoman again. Filibustering.
Okay. What about DNR? Is there something you can do? Right now, Hannibal's had a lot of problems with DNR. I myself have had problems with DNR in the past,
Yep.
and they are pretty much out of control.
Yep. So one of the things that, as I've listened on this campaign, I've heard from folks is just that. And what they say when they're being honest about it is they say, you know, there's just nothing you can do. When DNR or the EPA or whoever, that you get in the crosshairs of these agencies, you feel sort of powerless. You can't really push back. The power is disproportionately in the hands of the government. So we actually have an initiative that we came up with, talking to some business folks and some kit bonds, and that has to do with protection from government overreach, we call it. And the idea is to make sure that, not that we don't want clean water, we all want clean water and clean air, but we want to make sure that the balance of power, when there's citizens and businesses and farmers in the mix is on the side of sort of equal. And so you're not just intimidated. The example I give is up in north central Missouri, a small town. EPA came into town, they said your sewer system's broken, 75 years old, you have to fix it, it's going to cost you $5 million or so. 400 people live in the town. They had no idea really what to do, and they just sort of quickly settled and floated bonds. And this is something that, you know, as someone said later, when we investigated, we probably could have done half that and done it differently. Well, that's part of the problem, just an emblem of the balance of power. And so DNR, a lot of DNR's work is enforcing in collaboration with EPA. And if you gave me one agency and you said, what's the one agency that's having the biggest impact detrimentally on our lives, it would be the EPA. I mean, whether it's implementing cap and trade through regulations, but more practically, just causing everybody to have to dramatically change how they do things. Now, again, in St. Louis Metropolitan Sewer District just settled a lawsuit with EPA for $4.7 billion. And some of the fixes, some of the things they're doing are they're sort of gold-plated efforts because there's no taxpayer, nobody in the deal saying, wait a second, what are you doing? On one side of the table is EPA, on the other side of the table is an unelected set of, you know, labor-leaning bureaucrats, and they just sign off on the deal. So this idea of protection from government overreach would be to say, we're on your side, and find opportunities to push back on the regulations, find opportunities to make clear to the regulators that you can't be bullies, which is one of the things, and just generally try to change the dynamic in Missouri.